One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Okay, so here we are ready to paint. And there's the echo. Let's get rid of that. Okay, got rid of the echo. We should be in better shape now. Okay, so the plan today, we are going to paint Juliana the Herbalist.
I got Paramount.
Okay, so the skin tone, the plan for today. So we've got our cool little figure here. This is Juliana the Herbalist from Reaper Miniatures. As usual, the links to find this figure on the Reaper website will be down below. And she is only available in bones. I don't believe she's available in metal. Let me check my list. No, she's only available in bones. It's bones black material, they call it. And, very cool little mini. And was trying to figure out what color scheme I was going to use today. And a lot of people use sort of a classic fairy tale look for her. I've seen her painted up as Snow White. I've seen her painted as like a kind of like a farmer's daughter in a kind of like a blue dress with white trim and a blue skirt with a white shirt, all those kinds of things. And I had an interesting conversation a couple of days ago with somebody about storytelling on minis and how, you know, you kind of think about the time and the place and where the person is to get the setting and the idea for who they are, what they're doing, and then that can kind of inform all the decisions you make about what colors to use, what lighting to use, and all that sort of thing. And so as part of that conversation, what had occurred to me was that I was planning to paint this Juliana character as though she was just like some fresh-faced, friendly villager out collecting herbs, something like that. But it occurred to me, maybe that's not who she is. This character is from the Brinewind set from Reaper, and that's kind of a dark, dismal place, a lot of nefarious characters, a lot of evil characters. And so it occurred to me, maybe actually this is more like a young necromancer who's out gathering deadly nightshade to make poison, or she's getting ready to do some sort of spells, that sort of thing. The sickle is not something friendly. It's an enchanted instrument for doing evil things. So that was, in the end, I got this idea that maybe she's more like Wednesday Addams, something like that. So very pale skin, very dark hair. Her herbs are not bright and green and happy. They're kind of dark blue, glowing green. The plants in her basket will be sort of rotted and mottled looking. The berries will probably be purple like nightshade. And these two things on her base, a lot of people describe them as pine cones. And I think that's a fair idea, but they could also be painted up as some sort of evil hedgehog. I haven't really decided where I want to go with those yet, but I think in the short term, the plan is she's going to be very, very dark and unfriendly, and that's where I'm headed with this. I realized that this particular figure, I just noticed, is actually a casting defect. And I didn't notice that till just now. But you know what? We're going to roll with it. We'll just live with it. She's missing part of her collar. and I'll fake it with the other color. I think that's a good plan. All right, so the skin tone idea, skin's going to be pale, washed out. Hair is going to be dark black, maybe with a bit of a blue tint. And we'll do, and her clothing will be black with blue and maybe some off-green sort of sketchy looking colors as the highlights. That's my plan. So to start with, we'll just talk about how I'm going to do the skin tone. I think for the skin tone, I'm going to start with burgundy wine as my sort of darkest color. And then I'm going to actually just start right off the bat with Graveyard Bone. Graveyard Bone, which is a very pale off-white color, is going to be her main skin tone color. And for the highlights on that, I'll probably use a bit of solid white or dragon white, something like that, to give the lightest highlights on that. So her skin is going to be composed of burgundy wine with a little bit of Graveyard Bone added at a time to give us a skin color, and then highlighted with white, and maybe just a little bit of warmth in her cheeks with some, this is New Copper, but New Copper, rosy skin tone, any sort of slightly warmer skin tone will work, and maybe a dark red for lips. So that's the skin plan. So that's burgundy wine, aged bone, no, Graveyard Bone, solid white, rosy skin or New Copper, and then a dark red. I'm using deep red. For the various plants and things, I'm going to use a combination of Jade Green, Phantom Glow, Olive Green, and Dungeon Slime. I'm going to use those to do the leaves on the plants. For her satchel bag, I'm going to use, what is this, Tan Shadow, just basically any sort of desaturated brown tan color will work. And then for her clothing, we're going to use Dragon Black. I'm going to mix in some Midnight Blue, and we'll work it up with Stone Gray, or maybe some Olive Green. I haven't decided that yet, but that'll be your basic clothing color. So you need a black, a dark blue, and an off gray. A warm gray would work to do her clothing. That's the plan. Okay. If you're watching on Twitch, just want you to be aware that you can also move over and watch on the Discord. I've dropped the link in the Discord, to the Discord in the chat. Just make sure I drop it in there again in case it's blanked out when I started the stream. And you're welcome to join us over in the Discord if you want to chat with us. If you're painting along and you want to get feedback, that's where you put your photos is on the Discord in the chat. Okay, and I think with that, we are ready to start doing a bit of painting. So I'm going to start with the skin. So burgundy wine. I'm going to throw some burgundy wine on the palette on the top left. So I'm going to work dark to light across the palette. So a bit of burgundy wine. Graveyard Bone is the next color. And I put this quite a bit off to the right because I'm going to mix a lot of, I'm going to use that to make a lot of steps in the skin tone. A little bit of solid white, dragon white, any of those kind of pure white colors will work. Tiny bit of New Copper. And red for the lips. What's my plan? Oh, that color is totally gross. There we go. That's better. Okay. So, step number 1. I'm going to yeah, we're good. Okay. Grab some of the burgundy wine and move it off to the side. So this will be the first of the steps in the skin tone colors that I'm making. And I'm going to add just a little bit of that bone color. And it doesn't matter what bone color you're using. Use whatever one you like. They don't have to be the same colors that I'm using. Okay, and I'm getting a fairly pale version of burgundy wine. And this is going to be the base coat for my skin. So I'm going to start right off with that. And I'm going to start by painting her face. I'm going to get her face covered in this color, fill in the eye sockets, go right over her mouth. And well, we're doing the skin. We're doing the face first because just in case the paint starts to act funny on the palette, I know that this is as fresh as the paint's going to get. Straight out of the bottle, ready to go. I don't have to thin it or anything like that to get it to go on smoothly. I can work it. It's going to have a good drying time. But once it does start to dry, I want to move to another area and stop touching that paint. Because as it's drying, if I continue to work the paint, it's going to really just tear it up, tear chunks out of the surface of the figure and make it really look gross when it dries, get a really gross texture going on. So just try to work an area and then move on to the next. Just notice that my hands are really shaking badly today, and I don't know why that is. So apologize if this looks quite shaky. It just happens sometimes. Okay, there we go. We've got the skin painting her hands now. Work around to the back. Yeah, I'm very shaky. Let's see if we can get a better place to sit. You know, not every day is necessarily a good day to be painting minis. And, you know, some days you're just a bit shaky or your eyes are tired or, you know, you're just not feeling up to it. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you're having a physical issue, then maybe it's time to take a break, go do something else for a while, if you want to keep working on your hobby, you can switch over to doing, I don't know, work on terrain, clean up your paints, you know, do some figure prep, get the bones out of their packages, wash them, all that kind of good stuff, so that when you're ready to paint again, things will be ready to go. But sometimes forcing yourself to paint when it's physically painful, maybe not the best idea. If you just don't feel like painting, that's totally valid as well. I find quite often that if I'm in the habit of painting, like I have a set time that I paint every day, then it's not so difficult to get started. And that can help with that bit of a motivation challenge. Or just say, what I sometimes say to myself is, okay, I don't really feel like painting today. I do have stuff I got to get done or that I want to get done, but I don't really feel like painting that many today. So I just paint. I say to myself, if you paint anything, you're painting. And I grab whatever's closest at hand or whatever attracts my attention the most and just sit with it in my hand and look at it. Okay, and then that'll get me thinking about what color should I paint. And sometimes that's enough just to get me thinking about it, and I pick up the brush and start trying out the colors. And it doesn't really matter what I'm working on, whether it's somebody else's mini or my own mini. Some days you just need that little bit of extra inspiration to get rolling. I've had some spell effects I'm supposed to be painting. So I'll tell you what I was about to do. I got black paint in the palette, and the black, I'm going to do a base coat of black on the hair and on her dress now, so that those are ready to go. So if you want to keep working on that while I'm blathering on, you go right ahead. But I had these spell effects that I wasn't really feeling keen on painting. And then I saw somebody post a video about that, and I was like, well, I don't feel like painting, but I'll just paint anything. I'll grab those and go for it. And this is what I ended up with, these crazy looking giant floating COVIDs, which these are Games Workshop Purple Son of Shaiish, I think it's called. Anyway, doesn't matter what you paint, just paint anything, and it'll get the juices flowing. That's what I feel anyway. Is at least if I'm painting anything, I'm painting something, and I start to feel better as soon as I get the paint going. Okay, so I'm going to get a little bit of black paint, and I'm going to start painting the hair. And like I said, this is going to look a bit like a gothic television character. So we're going to start out by giving her a very, very dark black base coat on her hair. And we're going to do this base coat really early on because it's almost inevitable that we're going to make a few mistakes and get this black on the skin tone. Because the hair goes right up against her face and along her neck and along her back. And that'll give us a chance to tidy up any little mistakes we might make. So I paint along her hairline, use my best brush for that to get a nice sharp line. And then I'm going to follow this ponytail all the way out past that little thing that we'll paint like that little bit like I was going to say like a pink scrunchie, but no, we're going to paint it like a piece of bone, the finger bone of a giant or something that she's converted over to be her scrunchie. And I'm just going to keep going with that. Now at the back I'm not so concerned about being neat because the clothing is going to be black as well. And I'm not really that concerned about making mistakes there, but I'm still just going to practice being a little bit careful. I'll just and again remind anybody who's watching on Twitch, we're on Discord, and if you do have any questions, you're more than welcome to start chatting with us. There's another painter here in the studio working on the other side, and I like it when the painting becomes a little bit of a conversation. That we all learn a little bit more when people ask their questions, and I can sort of help address their questions as we paint along. And it's also more fun for me. I get to meet you, get to hear what your interests are. On that note, we're getting ready to select the next 12 minis for this project. We've done, this is mini number 18. And by the end of April, we will have done a total of 20. So I'm going to take a bit of a break in May. Going to run a painting contest here in my studio. We're going to run some little game events. I got to do a local game convention. But then in June, we're going to get back into it. And I'm going to pick out another 12 Bones minis. And we'll paint those. We'll do this paint along exactly the same. And I post a schedule as soon as they're picked so that if people want to paint along, you can order the minis well in advance. If you're in the local area here in Halifax, you can come pick them up right here in the studio. Or you can always order them online from Reaper Miniatures directly. And that's why we choose, as much as possible, figures that are available in both Reaper Bones plastic and in metal, to give you the most options to choose from and the best chance of finding it in stock wherever you happen to be, and the best chance that Reaper will have it in stock on their website. That's why we choose the minis that way. And but if you would like to see something specific painted, just send me a message, send me an email through my website. If you go to my website at hecatina.ca, there's a link for, requesting painting classes or just, asking for a commission quote or whatever. Just use that button and say, hey, I would like to see this miniature painted as part of your paint-alongs. And we'll throw it into the pile. And what I do is I try to find a variety of different miniatures to paint each time. So last time we did a lot of basic humanoid characters. So this time I've done some more monsters, some undead. We did a unicorn. We're doing try to do a little bit more of a variety. For the next season, I've already decided that we're going to paint at least one terrain piece, and it'll be a Reaper Bones terrain piece, a small one. It's going to be a doorway, an archway, and that has lots of interesting things we can talk about. Weathering, we talk about painting bone, painting stone, all kinds of good stuff on that one to look at. And so I still need to pick out 11 more. So this is your chance, if you want to get involved, to make a suggestion about what mini we might actually paint next. And I'm just going to say out loud right now for the guy painting in the back room, he picked 3 of the minis for this season, so I might not let Day pick any more next time. And he's allowed to get mad at me when I say that. Seems unfair, doesn't it, Day? Okay. So we're back in now, and the black is starting to dry. It's good. So, oh wow, look at that shake. I wonder what's causing that. Excuse me, just one sec. Oh, I know what it was. I was leaning against my arms on the table earlier, so my back strain is already pretty high. Be all right. It's the price you pay to do some wargaming. I was leaning on the table playing a game, and now I'm all shaky. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my skin tones now that we've got that little bit of a base coat on the black. I'm going to grab my burgundy wine, and I'm going to pull that off to the side. I get a little dab of it off to the side. And I'm going to make a thinner mix of the burgundy wine. So I'm going to add a drop of water to it. So it's about half burgundy wine, half water now. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little bit more water in there. Just a little bit more. That's about what I'm looking for. It's a little bit, it just flows a little bit. Let me show you on the palette. This is the paint I'm looking at here. So when I move it, you can see how it pulls back into a bead of paint quite quickly. That's about the consistency that I'm looking for this step. And what that does for me is it lets me roll the brush into a really sharp point, and that paint's going to flow into the recesses pretty easily when I go back and start painting on her face. And that's what I'm looking for, because I want to get this paint in around her eye sockets. And I'm going to define the features of her face with this color. So I'm going to start by putting this right in the eye sockets and underneath her eyebrow. So we get a nice dark brow and a dark eye socket on both sides. Right there. I don't mind getting this on the black. Okay, I'm not worried about getting this on the black if I make a mistake. I'm going to paint along the sides of her nose, under her nose. She's got these little dimples under her cheeks. I'm going to put a line around those dimples. Her dimples are going to be quite strong, and this is going to make her look a little bit gaunt, actually, by the time we get to painting the final details on the skin tone. And I'm going to let this roll into her mouth as well, darken the mouth up. And if it makes a mess, don't worry about it. Really, don't worry about it. This is just a first step. I'm going to put a little edge around her face with this color. Oh, my focus is really crap today. Let's try that. Wow, look at that shake. That's insane. So here's a trick for if you're being very shaky. You can see how much my hand is shaking there on the screen. So if you look up in the corner here, put my hands together first, kind of relax, bring my hands down by my side, and then get into a comfortable painting position, and then just orient the mini to a comfortable position for painting. And by having my hands together, that'll help reduce some of the shake. It also takes some of the strain off of my neck. Okay? But of course, where I'm painting on camera, I have to keep the miniature in a set position. So unfortunately, it just means today you can see a lot of that, a lot of shaking. It's not because I'm nervous. All right. So I'm also going to put a dark line of this purple under her jawline. It's burgundy wine, I should say. Put a line under the jawline. And then anywhere that her skin meets another surface, so along the edge of her hairline, along the edge of the clothing, I'm going to put this on her arm, where it meets her shirt, where her fingers meet the sickle, any of those little creases where two surfaces meet, I'm putting this color as a bit of a shadow. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect, because my next step is going to be to go and highlight with the with this slightly lighter version of the skin tone we used a moment ago. And that's going to give us a nice, interesting, contrasting skin tone. You're probably going to get a lot of watermarks as this dries, and I'm not super concerned about that because we're going to be going over her with quite a few layers of skin tone to clean all that up, and it will be okay. There we go. Give that a little while to dry, and while that's drying, just double check the eyes in particular are nice and dark, because that's going to be where a lot of her personality comes from. So we don't have to go back and do that later when we start painting the eyes. Okay, there we go. You can always just paint her skin all dark right at the start, like paint it all mahogany brown, paint it all, what's this color called again? Burgundy wine, paint it all deep red, and then layer up from there with the lighter colors. But I want her to be really pale, and I don't want to have to do a lot of layers. So starting like this means I'm probably going to have to do 2 or 3 layers before the skin tone becomes really light again. And it's going to have an odd sort of cast to it, which is what I'm looking for. Okay, so that needs to dry for a minute because there was quite a bit of water in there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab that midnight blue, that dark blue that I had earlier. I'm going to put some of that on the palette. And you could use all kinds of different colors. You could use nightshade purple. You could use, good color for this would be blue liner, Reaper's blue liner. Let's see if we've got that. I do. Oh, blue liner. Blue liner is a very, very dark blue color that Reaper makes. I think they still make it. Double check. Don't want to tell lies to you. Always have the Reaper website open. Let's see what they say. Blue liner. Oh, perfect. Blue liner, gray liner, and brown liner are part of the same, come in the same pack together. So that's perfect. I'll put some of that on my palette as well so you can see how dark it is. Of course, I should probably unplug it before I do that. There we go. Hey, Dad, you want to try some of the blue liner?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, give me 1 sec. I'll bring it up. Actually, I'll just toss it to you. One of the weird things about black. Okay, and we're giving her black clothes and black hair. Black doesn't really look black. So what we're going to do is darken the black by adding blue to it. So I'm going to take this black, put a little bit off to the side. And this black was dragon black, which is sort of an indigo black. How do I know that? If you want to know what color your black is, just take your black, put a little bit on your palette, and then get a light color. So I'm going to grab this pure white over here and mix some of the pure white in with that black color. And that'll give you a sense of whatever color it turns with white mixed into it will give you a sense of what the base colors are of that black. So this one turns a sort of a blue, almost like a French gray. Okay. So that tells me that this is sort of an indigo black or a blue black. They do the same thing with some blacks. You get a dark green. Some you'll get kind of a really weird red color. If you do this with nightshade purple, you end up getting amethyst purple. It's really interesting the way that that sort of plays out. So if you're not sure what your black is, just give it a try. And then, so with that bluish tone, that tells me it's a bit of a cold black. So I'm going to take that bit of what was this color called again? Blue liner. I'm going to mix some black into it. And the effect of the blue on that black, your brain is going to perceive it as being darker, colder, and further away than just straight black. And so what I'm going to do with that now is I'm going to use that as a wash over her hair. So I'm going to add quite a bit of water to that. I've got this little puddle off to the side. I'm adding quite a bit of water to it. This is what it looks like on my finger, okay? And then I'm going to let that flow in over all of her hair. And that's going to make that hair look even darker than it already does. So I'm going to do that, start right up here on the crown, and slowly push the brush or pull the brush across and let the paint flow off the brush and fill the recesses. Just going slowly. Now, if you want your girl to look really, really goth, you could use this color in the eye sockets as well. Give her really, really dark eyelashes. Let's do that just for fun. Just put a little dab of that black right in the eye socket. And that's going to give her that really dark sort of gothic TV character look. There we go. Okay, and we keep doing that over all of the clothing. Sorry, not over the clothing. Over the all of her hair. So work all the way down along the ponytail. Let that flow into the recesses. Okay. Camera doesn't know what to do with this. That's why it's a bit hard to see. But as we get more contrast painted onto her, these shapes will start to show up a lot better. All right. And with that midnight blue, since I threw it on the palette anyway, now that I don't plan to really use it, I think I'm going to paint the blade of her sickle, this midnight blue color. And that'll be a good base underneath to give the sickle a nice dark metal look. Now normally I do everything in metallics because these are beginner paint-alongs, but I'm really tempted to do a bit of sort of a speed painting approach to non-metallic metal effect, which could look really good on this figure. I'll decide that later. But either way, this blue is a good undercoat, either for a silver or a bronze or a pewter, or for a non-metallic metal approach. There we go. Good enough. And that skin tone should be pretty much dry at this point. Now, my palette is drying out really fast today, so I'm going to put a drop of flow improver there as usual. Put just a little bit of flow improver into that mix, bring it back to life. There we go. A little bit more purple in it. Burgundy wine, I should say. Okay, move some of that off to the side. And I'm going to add some more of that bone color into the mix. So just maybe one brush full of bone into that burgundy wine mix, lightening it up further, I should say. There we go. So that'll be my next color for the skin tone. So that was my shadow, super dark eyes, first layer of skin tone, second layer of skin tone. And we're going to go quite light on this skin tone by the time we're done, because we want her to look almost like she's dead. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, I'm looking at her face now. And now thinking about light direction becomes pretty important. Okay, we haven't really had to worry about that so far. But now as I'm looking at the mini, my plan was to have her lit from this side. So her bag of herbs will be lit. This leather container that she's putting herbs into will be illuminated. And then her face is going to be lit on the right side. This arm is going to be lit on the right side. And this herb, which is being held up in the air, that'll be pretty brightly lit. And then the rest of her body will be kind of on the shadow side. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by highlighting her forehead. And my brush strokes are going to pull from the shadow side towards the lit side. So from away to close, because the lit side of her is closer to me. And I'm going to hit just kind of the center, the middle of her forehead, and pull that color back to me to get a highlight on her forehead. Okay, Do the same thing on the bridge of her nose. Make sure we get the nostril on the side. And then I'm looking for where her eye sockets are. And I'm looking for the top of her cheeks. I can see her cheeks are there. Okay. And I don't want to paint this in the eye socket. I want to leave the eye sockets unpainted for now. And I'm going to pull that color up close to the edge of the hairline without painting the eye socket. Okay, and it might look a little bit powdery. Mine certainly does. And, you know, that's just kind of the nature of the beast when you're thinning out very light colored paints. But I'm gonna stay firm and keep this plan going. I'm gonna highlight her chin a little bit, same way, and her upper lip. Get a little bit more of this color too, but I don't want to paint her eyes. Now I'm gonna do the other side of her face. Make sure we get her nostril, but we don't want to fill in right up against her nose. We want to leave that quite dark. And then we'll do the top part of her cheek. Give her a little round apple cheek. And if you want to, you can paint the eyelid this color, but I wouldn't make that too strong because we want to keep that kind of goth look going on. Paint the top of her cheek, side of her chin. There we go. That's what I've got so far. Okay. And then leave the shadow under her chin. But then move down and paint this color on her neck, bringing the brush strokes forward. And try to leave a little bit of that burgundy wine that we painted against her neck, or against the clothing. Don't totally cover the shadow over. There we go. She's got little collarbones that just show up there, just inside of her neckline. We'll make sure we highlight those collarbones. And her sternum is just there. A little bit of a dot of paint on her sternum. There we go. Collarbones, sternum, perfect. And then we'll do her arms. The hand which is raised, the emphasis is mostly going to be on the outside, facing the light. So I'll start up here on her fingers. I'm going to paint her fingers individually and pull the brush back towards me, towards the light. Same thing on the top of her thumb. And then I'm going to work my way down the back of her hand, looking for the raised areas. Make sure that's kind of where my brush strokes are centered. To give a bit of a... Because if you look at the back of your hand, right, there's those shapes that become visible. Okay, that's kind of what I'm trying to start making more distinctive. And then the brush. So for on her arm, we want shadow underneath and highlight on the top. So I'm going to bring the brush strokes from the shadow side towards the light and just gently pull the brush strokes forward. Okay, and try not to flick the brush, just gently pull the paint forward. There we go. And then go sideways along there. There we go. Side of the nose, top of the cheek. What have we not done? Oh, the other arm. Actually, we should probably do a little bit of highlighting on these fingers. Even though they're on the shadow side, they're going to get quite a lot of bounce light. So we'll give them a bit of this color as well. This color is still very, very dark compared to what her skin tone is going to be when we're done. So it could actually be, you know, the shadow color as well. There we go. A lot of this is going to be, most of this is going to get covered over by lighter colors. All right, and then we do her other arm as well. Just so I don't forget this time, I'm going to start on the shadow side, put some of this on the shadow side of her arm first, back of her hand, top of her thumb. Get the fingers underneath the sickle. Mine has a little bit of a casting defect. There's like a gap where her ring, in the middle of her ring finger, where a ring would be. There's just like a hole there. I don't know if the sculpt is supposed to have one. This particular model was, I got this at ReaperCon in 2019, I want to say. And it was one of the figures left over from the Kickstarter. So it's not the best figure. It was one of the earliest Bones Black figures. And I think they were still kind of working on the process at that time. So it's got a few little bugs. Missing finger and a few little casting defects. It's a really nice looking model though. Okay, there we go. We can see what her face looks like now. And now what we're going to do is we're going to do the next lighter color right away. We're going to grab some more bone color, add it into that mix. And now what we basically have is sort of an off-white, purplish off-white. And this is our next layer. So I want this to be fairly thin. So thin in the sense that I've rolled it on the palette to smooth it out and work it into the brush, and I've got a fine point on the brush. Not thin in the sense of adding a lot of water to it. I have added just a bit of flow improver to it. The challenge you run into is that if you add a lot of water to it at this stage, it's going to flood the mini, and it'll be very difficult to control where the concentration of paint lands as you lift each brush stroke. So just try to smooth out the paint and work the paint rather than adding a lot of water to it, and it'll be easier to manage where the highlights end up. So I did her forehead almost exactly the same way as I did on the first step. Did the eyelid, bridge of her nose, that nostril, upper lip, and the cheek, the raised part of her cheek behind that arm. So in there. Now I'm going to do the other side of her face. Her nose is going to be casting a bit of a shadow. So I will highlight the front side of that nostril, a bit of that eyelid. Now if you're a new painter, painting just the eyelid might be really tough. Don't worry about it, just leave it if you don't want to do it. And then I'm going to paint the upper part of her cheek, a little rosy round apple cheek, and the upper part of her lip. And then her chin. Now remember, this is not necessarily a good character. So she's, in my mind, she's a bit of a necro. So she more focused on what she's doing than on having a perfect makeup job or whatever. And so I don't mind if she looks a bit rough. Okay, so collarbones. A little bit of the sternum. And then highlighting her neck, making sure I don't completely cover that shadow under her jaw. Like there's a shadow line I painted under her jawline. We want to keep that. There we go. And just touch up anything that I missed or that looks a little bit chalky. I'm going to give it a second coat of the same color. All right, there she is. Now we're going to do the same thing on her hands. I'm going to start on the back of her thumb. Yeah, so I was just looking at one of the newer casts of this figure that I've got here in the studio. And they're quite a bit nicer than this very old one. I've also painted this particular mini, I think, at least twice before. And I didn't ever paint the whole model, just painted the face and then painted over it again a couple of times over the last few years. And I know that's resulted in the surface of the model being a bit rougher than it will be with a physically newer cast. So if you've got one that you ordered recently from Reaper, it's probably going to be quite a bit nicer looking than the one I'm working with, which I've definitely done a number on. Actually, I don't think it was. Where did this one? Yeah, this came from ReaperCon. Yeah. We're really focusing these highlights towards the light direction, less light on the shadow side. And I'll do the same thing on the other arm. Focus on the thumb first, make sure that's well defined, and then the side of her arm towards the light. And then I'll paint the figures individually. There we go. That's pretty good. I think I'm pretty happy with that. And now we're going to go one level lighter. I'm going to grab just straight bone color. Going to work it with the brush. Roll the brush in. I need just a touch of flow improver, just a little bit. Just because of how dry it is here today. I don't know if you can see, but the palette's already drying out. The paper's already drying out the edge of my palette. And here we go. Got the brush loaded up. And I'm going to do all those same highlights again, just a little bit smaller and closer towards the light side. So forehead, bridge of the nose, side of the nostril, top of the cheek, top of the lip, tip of the nose, top of the lip on the other side, eyelid, top of the cheek, just a little bit, and on the chin. I'm going to go down to her neck, really focus towards those collarbones because of the shadow that her head's going to cast. And a little bit on her chest. Go. The opposite hand, so the hand with the sickle, just focused on the thumb. A little bit about the wrists with this color. Don't want a very big highlight. And then just those knuckles below her thumb where they are gripping the sickle. Okay, she's pretty well defined there now. And then the hand, which is raised, we're going to do the side of the thumb facing the light. Okay, and then the backs of those knuckles facing the light source. I sort of said, I think of the light source as being like the moon on a kind of intermittently cloudy night. So she's not looking particularly she's definitely not illuminated by sun. In fact, she might even be illuminated by her own magic spell if she's out there collecting her herbs. I'm sure there's some particular lore-driven reason why she would do that. I don't know what it might be. Preserve their magical properties, make sure they don't get washed out by the sunlight, I guess, something like that. So that's where we are. Skin is pretty well defined. Now, what we're going to do, I think I'm going to do her eyes now, because the eyes are going to be a little bit of a challenge. I'm going to use the same bone color as the whites of her eyes. Now, there's a couple of different ways to do this. What I've normally been doing with these videos is we do what we call the two-step eye, where I just put one dot on either side of the eye socket to give the indication of what direction she's looking, and we call that an eye. Today, though, I'm going to do a little bit different because she's looking directly at that little leaf. So it's a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to take my brush here, and I lower the brush sideways into the eye socket, and I make like an oval shaped dot like that, using the sculpted orb of her eye to catch the tip of the brush and just paint the ball of her eye, the whites of her eyes. And I'll line up the brush and the mini, and then just lower the tip of the brush down into that eye socket and just paint the orb of her eye. Okay, it takes a little bit of a gentle touch to do that. You might have to try this several times to get it to work. But then come from the other direction, line up the brush, line up the eye, and then just lower the brush so the tip of the brush rests on the eye. Give it a little wiggle to make an oval shape. Okay, and there you've got a pair of eyes painted. So there they are. There you can see her. And she's looking directly at this little leaf. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to give her a pair of eyes that are looking at this leaf. And she would look a little bit cross-eyed as she's looking at this thing. So we're going to use, I'm going to use blue liner for that. I'm going to use that very, very dark blue liner color. Going to get just a bit of that on the tip of the brush. Form the tip of the brush as always. And if you've got a brush with a fine point, that's the brush you want for this job. I'm using this Raphael 8404, which is practically brand new. It's lovely, razor sharp point. And that's what I'm going to use because it's got a good tip. But you might have to use whatever brush works best for you. Now, to paint the eyes, I'm going to rotate the mini so that the tip of the brush basically is in a perpendicular line across her eye. And I'm going to do the same thing I did before. Just lower the tip of the brush in and touch that orb with the tip of the brush. And this is going to make a mess. We're going to get a little bit of that color on her cheek. Okay, and I'm okay with that because we got that goth makeup thing already on the go. And when I put that dot in, I want a little bit of the white still showing on either side of that, I don't know if you can see that, of that iris that I just painted. I'm actually waiting for new glasses so I can either see the mini clearly or I can see the screen clearly, but not both. So hopefully that is clear enough for you to be able to make it out, but I can't actually see the TV screen or the computer screen clearly at the moment. What do you think, Day? Is it clear enough to see that I painted? No. Okay. Well, I'm going to try to do the other one now. I'm going to turn the mini upside down now so that I get better angle with my brush to be able to reach in there, okay, and do the eye from the other direction. This one's going to be hard to see because of her arm. And I'm probably going to get a blob of this color on her cheek again. But I want that little dark spot in her eye kind of closer to the center, so she looks like she's looking at the little herb that's in her hand. Okay, and there it is. So there's one eye. Let's just do this like this. There. There's one. And there's the other one that I made the mistake. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with where she's looking with those eyes. But I need to fix her cheek. So you remember the last color that we used for the skin tone was just straight bone color. So I'm going to take unthinned bone color, and right in the center of her cheek, which is where we just last used this color, I can just carefully paint over that dark spot that I made by mistake. And fix her cheek up a little bit. And now she's got well defined. Wow. Well defined eyes on both sides. Doesn't look like it from the camera. But she does. Just adjust that a little bit. Like I say, it might take you 1 or 2 tries to get that perfect. But of course, if you're just a starting painter, you might find that very difficult. And if you do, don't worry about it. You don't have to paint the eyes. I think you always should paint the eyes, or at least try to, because the more often you paint eyes, the easier it gets, and the faster and more confidently you can do it. And even if they look horrible, it's worth practicing it. Just do it for the practice, and eventually you will get much better at it. And it doesn't take many attempts for that improvement to happen. Okay. There she is. All right. So the next thing I'm going to do now. So we were going to use a bit of pink on her cheeks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that bone color. Excuse me. And I'm going to add a little bit of this rosy color to the bone. Just a little touch of it. Give it a little bit of pink. I can thin that a little bit if I want to. Don't really need to, but just thin it a little bit so it flows a bit smoother. There we go. And now we can do like that red line under the cheek with this color. And because it's almost exactly the same color as what we just used, it's just barely going to show up on the lower part of her cheek. So just a little bit on the lower part of the cheek. And that'll just slightly change the color a little bit warmer. Now, I know we said she was going to be like a gothic character, but we still want her to look like she's alive. So just a little bit of that warmth in the cheek will help make her look a little bit more human. Okay. A little bit more human, a little bit less undead. So she's distinctly different from the creature she's animating. That's the key. I'm just going to touch up on that. I made a little bit of a mistake there, but there we go. I don't know if you can see that on the camera, but there's a line at the bottom of her cheek on the side facing the light that I totally had missed till now. And I'm just going to tidy that up a little bit by making a slightly darker mix of that pinkish skin tone. There we go. As usual, I have started to putter a little bit. I'm sort of making changes as I go. And I'll get hold of myself in a second and stop doing that. So I'll do things that you can emulate. I just felt like those creases in her cheek had gotten a little too dark. I just painted over them with a slightly lighter paint. They're still visible. They're still visible in her cheek. Okay, but they're not like deep, I'm an undead sort of crevices anymore. She still looks pretty gaunt, but she doesn't look like she's dead. Okay, pretty happy with that. And then, as we've said before, we're going to paint her lips this red color. Now, her lips from the start are this mahogany, what's this color called? Burgundy wine color. And if, as you've been painting along, you might have gotten some lighter paint on the lips. So this is where you go back and you tidy that up a little bit. And how do you do that? So we're going to paint the upper lip and the lower lip separately. That seems like madness, I know. So what we're going to do, I've got my brush loaded with burgundy wine. I line up the brush with her face, okay? And I come in sideways so the brush comes up against her lower lip, just touches the edge of the sculpted shape, and leaves this red color or this purple color on the upper lip. I do the same thing, bring the brush in and catch the sculpted round shape of her lower lip and darken it up again. And that's with the burgundy wine, which is the color we started with for her skin tone. Okay, so that was the burgundy wine. Now, the upper lip is going to shade the lower lip. So I'm going to leave the upper lip that color now. But I'm going to take this, what color did I use? Deep red. I'm going to load my brush with deep red. And exactly as I just did for the lower lip with a darker color, I bring in my brush, not much paint on it, bring it in carefully and just lower it in on an angle so the brush is parallel to the orientation of her lip. Just touch the rounded outside shape of the lower lip and leave a little oval of that red color on the lower lip. Sounds like madness, but the key is get your comfortable brushing position and then orient the mini to the brush so you can just gently lower the tip of the brush and let the sculpted shape do its job and catch the brush and let the color flow onto it. If you have a lot of water in your paint, that becomes much more difficult because the water will cause the paint to flood out as the bristles get bent. So you try to do that. If you can use a little bit of flow improver, which will slow down the drying time to give more time to work to get lined up. But generally speaking, you don't want to have the paint thinned a lot to do that. It's much easier with the paint not thinned. So there we go. Her face is done. She's got little, very slightly rosy cheeks, but she still looks pretty pale and cadaverous. Now, if I was feeling particularly confident, I could go back in and use that solid white and do little reflection dots in her eyes. I'm not going to do that today. But what we will do is we'll take some of that bone and add some dragon white to the bone color to make an even lighter highlight color. So this will be the final highlight color for her skin. And where we're going to use that, we're just going to use that on the bridge of her nose, the tip of her nose, and maybe on like the tops of her cheeks if we need it. So just the tip of her nose, put on the bridge of her nose. I'm going to put a little dot of this on her cheek, very high up on her cheek, under her eyes. And I'll do the same thing on the other cheek, under the corner of her eye, close to the light source. This is when you would do your reflection dots if you're feeling that way. I actually normally do the reflection dots with pure white, so I'll do that. I said I wasn't gonna, and here I am doing it anyway. Typical, eh? Let's keep this at the beginner level, Geoff. Let's just make it super easy and make them paint two-tone eyes with reflection dots. Okay. So painting reflection dots is not hard. It's exactly the same as what we just did painting the black dots in the eyes. Just get your brush ready, get everything lined up, and then just lower the tip of the brush. You can do a test dot in your hand if you want. See if it's flowing. Yeah, that flows fine. And then just reach in and just very gently touch the eye and make that little white dot on the edge of the iris. Well, worked reasonably well. Probably not visible on the camera, but they're done anyway. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with that. I think maybe a little bit of that mixture of white and bone on the knuckles of that hand close to the light. Maybe a little bit on the wrist bone down there. Back of the thumb on the other hand, could use that a little bit. Maybe the top two fingers as well, just a little bit. Okay, we're going to call that done. Okay, so there's the skin tone done. Now, just realized that I missed the back of those fingers on the hand holding the little herby thing. So I'm going to fix that before I go any further. Missed the finger right there. Okay, it goes right under that herb. And then so like the ring finger and the middle finger I missed on her right hand. I think I missed them because the sculpt, or sorry, not the sculpt, the cast has a bit of a defect. And there's a bit of a mold line and then a gap. So it's a bit of like there was an offset in the mold. So difficult to reach the brush in along that mold line. But now her fingers are a little bit better defined. Might even have a ring on that ring finger. We could do that. We could fake it. We could put a ring on that ring finger. That's the kind of detail that you don't want to be thinking about right now at this stage of your painting process. You can always go back and do those things at the end. But my head is a bit weird today, so I'm just going to do that anyway right now. There we go. Put a dark line on each side of where I want that ring to be. There you go. And now there's that ring visible on her finger right there. I don't know if that's part of the sculpt. I don't know if it's a casting defect or what, but now it's part of our mini and it makes me happy. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is the hair. So for the hair, we had our blue-black color that we put as a wash to really darken the shadows on the hair. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, what was my plan for the hair? Well, we'll just use the bone color, I guess. Doesn't matter. We're going to mix some bone color right in with that blue-black. And that's going to give us a very slightly lighter color, sort of a blue-gray. And to highlight the hair, I'm just going to keep adding that and making a lighter color. Now, it's kind of making me annoyed that that's so blurry today. Okay. So when you're highlighting hair, you want to consider the light direction. Our light is coming this way. So I'm going to start on that side of the head, start at the crown, and I'm going to pull down from the crown of her hair to a point at about, I would call it like the 10 o'clock position on her head. Okay. And then I'm going to go from the other direction and pull up from down below back to the 10 o'clock position. And I'm ignoring the sculpt. Okay. I'm ignoring that bit of sculpting so that we get like this uniform highlight that goes across the crown of her head. And that's going to be the focus of my highlight, is that sort of line of color at the 10 o'clock position. But then I'm going to rotate her head around. And as I go around, I'm going to raise that slightly. So it's like a halo of color, kind of cockeyed on her head. It's not perfectly centered on her head. It's closer to the ring, kind of leans towards the light source. Now, one of the tricks about painting things black is you don't want to lower the amount of black below about, say, 75 or 80%, something like that. So I want to try to keep as much of it, that dark color, as possible. So these highlights need to be pretty small so that we don't end up just making it look like she's got blue-gray or steel-gray hair. Okay, so there's that ring of color around the head. And then we're going to do the same thing on her braid. Now her braid goes along the back, so the light's coming across it this way. It doesn't get much of a highlight, but what it does get is like a line of color across the back. And then if you look at it from the front, the light would come this way, and it would catch the top edge of that braid in a line like that. There's our little bit of bone that we're going to paint later. And then this little tassely bit, just going to put a little loop of that color on there, a little scoop. Okay. So that's the first color on the hair. Now we're going to add more bone into the same mix, lighten it up again, and we're going to do the same highlights again, just much, much smaller. So I'll start again on the side closest to the light, establish where the center of my highlight's going to be at around 10 o'clock. And because I want her hair to look quite black and shiny, this highlight's going to be probably less than half as wide as the previous one. So it's going to have quite a bit of contrast, and it's going to look shiny. So a nice small highlight, quite tight, but again, ignore the texture. Just look at the overall general shape of her head as being a sphere. And we're painting a ring of reflected light around the border of that sphere. Okay. Like that. So that's starting to look a little bit like a highlighted halo effect on her hair. Okay. We do the same thing on the braid. You can come down here and do it on the braid. And again, ignore the sculpted texture on the braid. Just put a line of this color in the center of the previous highlight. Same thing at the front of the braid. Just a line of this color right down the middle of the previous highlight. And then a smaller one on the edge of that little scoop of color that we did. Okay, next thing, you're going to guess it, more bone color. So now we should be about 3/4 bone color and just a hint of that blue-black color. So it's a very sort of light blue-gray. And we do the same thing again. The highlight is going to be one step smaller again, so narrower, about half the width of the last time. And once again, ignore the texture. Just put that line right down the middle of the previous highlight at about that 10 o'clock position. And go all the way around. And as you come to the back of the head, remember that it goes higher on the back of the head than on the front. Higher on the side, closer to the light. Sorry, higher on the back side than on the side close to the light. And just keep that highlight going right in the middle of the highlight that we just did, and it's about half the width of that highlight. Still ignoring that sculpted hair texture. Okay, and now we've got, you can see that halo line all the way around back to the front. Okay, and we do the same thing on that braid, but now where the braid is right in the back, I'm just going to put that highlight in the center of each of those little knots of the sections of braid to separate them from each other. So it's essentially just a little dot of this color in the center of each of those sections of braid to separate them. On the front, I'm going to be going one level lighter. So I don't do that. I just put a line of this color right down the middle of that previous highlight, but smaller than we did it last time. And the same thing on these little bits at the end. Just a little scoop of this color out towards the end. Okay, here we go. And we've got our last highlight on the hair coming now. I'm going to grab a dollop of this pure white. I'm going to throw it into that mix. So this is really light colored now, or very light paint now. And now when I go to do this again, this is going to be a narrower highlight than we had the last time, but we're just going to catch the raised sculpted bits of texture in the hair this time. So little dots of this light color right in the middle of the previous highlight, but only in the areas raised and sculpted. Now when you get better at this sort of painting, you can choose to reach in to the depths and grab the edges of sort of receded bits of hair to kind of coordinate, to make sure that your highlights stay continuous and sensible. But as you're just starting out, if you don't feel comfortable with that, don't worry about it. Just worry about hitting the raised edges of those highlights. And I'm going to do that on the front and not on the back. because the light is coming this way. It's not going to be catching as strongly on the back there. And then I'm going to do the same thing, but now on the braid. So I'm going to separate each of these little whorls of hair with a white dot in the center of each of those previous bits, and then just a little bit on the tip of that hair so that it looks sort of shiny and illuminated. Okay, so now we've got Wednesday Addams style highlighted very, very dark hair. Now, if you're doing this and you found like you made the highlights too big, it looks too dark, it was a little bit rushed, you're not really happy with the way it looks, what you do is just repeat the same process over again. Go all the way back to that very, very dark blue-black mix that we made with the black liner. Make a wash out of it. Make it quite thin. And then you can lay this over top of what you just did to dull it back down again. Okay, and it'll make the highlights seem smaller. And then you can go back again afterwards and redo the highlights but tighter. And because they're sort of faintly there already, you end up with something that looks quite smooth and like it has depth to it. It's not a bad idea, not a bad approach to go back, do a dark wash over the hair. It's particularly a wash with your either your base color, if you're starting from a dark color, or whatever wash you used at the start to establish your dark zones. And then go back and repeat the highlights afterwards. See, that looks quite subtle now. But it definitely looks black, but it's definitely got a highlight, like a shininess to it. And that's what we were aiming for. All right, now, here she is. How far? We're about halfway through our time. And that's about right. We've done the face, all that stuff. And now it's time to get into some other details. Okay, so what we're doing now, I mixed some stone gray into the black to get a slightly less black color, but it's still very, very dark. And this is going to be my first highlight on the dress. So I'm going to go and look for the collar of her shirt. This is going to get this highlight. I'm looking at this sleeve out here, this puffy sleeve on her left arm. And the raised parts of that close to the light, we're going to give that a little highlight of that dark gray color. Now that her hair is totally painted, we're going to be a little bit careful not to get this on the hair and not to get it on the skin tone. Okay. I'm going to work my way down and then around. So I've done her shoulder, did that little bit of her shirt by her chest, and now I'm looking at her lap. Her lap where she's kneeling, top of that left leg is going to get a bit of this color. We want to keep the highlights. These highlights can be larger, but we want them to be small still. No, if you make very small highlights like we did on her hair, the dress is going to look shiny. And I don't think we want the dress to look shiny. But focus towards the light direction. You can make the highlights fairly large. Let me rephrase that. They're larger than the highlights we did on the hair, but you still don't want them to be huge, because you still want this to read as black. And the more you turn gray, the more gray the color is going to look overall. So you want to try to keep it looking black. So focus on, so now I'm going to do the other arm. Focus on the raised areas of the arm, the sleeve, any raised areas. Like the sleeve has these 3 little bumps. Those get that highlight color. This puffy part of the sleeve has 1, 2, 3, 4 little round bumps facing the light. And then she's got the collar of her dress, and the back of her shirt has these 1, 2, 3, 4 little bumps, and then there's 1, 2, 3 along down the back of the shirt. They all get this highlight color. And then the light coming down this way, the back of her dress by her back side is going to get a bit of a highlight, so we'll do a little bit right there on the round bit, and then there's a line there and a line there that'll get this highlight as well. And that's probably enough with this color. Just sort of defining the overall shape of her clothing. Oh, there's that edge of the dress down by her feet. We'll paint that this color as well. Okay, that's enough. Now, because she's out doing herb collecting, you know what would be cool? Let's mix in just a tiny touch of Phantom Glow or a similar color. You could use Surf Aqua, Verdigris, you could use the Jade Green, but just a tiny little bit of that color, because that's going to give that black dress sort of a creepy, odd color now when we highlight it. So mixing in just a little bit of that color. That was one of the colors I had picked out at the start to use on the herbs and on the lighting effects. Okay, it's a very saturated, bright blue-green. I always forget to turn the mic back on. So I add a little bit of this Phantom Glow in there, a little bit of Stone Gray, thinned it just a touch because my palette's very dry. And we're going to do the same highlighting again, but as usual, we do the same highlights but a little bit smaller. And that just helps to pick out those shapes a little bit. So the collar, and in all cases, we want to focus on the part of the object closer towards the light source. So on this shoulder, for example, okay, on that shoulder, there's these little puffy shapes. We focus on the part of them which is high on the shoulder where the light's going to catch them. Okay, and we keep those really small and tight so that it doesn't stop the dress from looking back. This part of her shirt right here by her shoulder, I think that might be a breast there, I'm not sure. There's a round shape there, must be. That's going to catch the light just a little bit. This sleeve, a little bit on the front of that sleeve, it's almost like a Z shape, Z like that on that cuff. Keeping it quite small. And then we'll work our way around the mini the same as we did before. So we'll do the work our way down. So on her lap here, a little bit of this color just above the little ring on the sickle. There's a line that comes around the front under her apron. Just the flat side of that faces towards the light will get this color. Same with that one right there. The flat side of it that faces the light gets this little bit of color. And just a little dab on her left knee. And this bit of her lap here, right by the corner of the apron in that little bucket. That's going to get a bit of this color. Actually, you can see the camera can now pick out the shapes, right? The colors, there's enough contrast there that the camera's starting to get adjusted to it. Poor camera software must have a heart attack every day I'm going to start painting. Okay, just a little bit more of that, and then her right knee gets a little bit of that. But we don't want it so much that it stops looking black. There we go. And we'll do this, rotate her around, and we're looking at the dress from the other side now. So the collar, top of her shoulder, these little puffs of the dress, those round shapes facing the light, get this. Top of the sleeve. Collar I already did. The back of her shoulder there. Those little raised bits of cloth. Okay. And on her back side, it might be just a little bit of this color there. Kind of like over her right butt cheek. Middle of that flat bit of the dress, just like that. It's going to be enough to make that shape visible. Okay, that's what we really want, is to keep that dress looking dark but make the shapes visible. Now on the front, I think really, like, we look at it from this direction, that's going to get one level lighter. So I'm going to put some more Stone Gray into that mix, just a touch more Phantom Glow because I like it. There we go. And then that will be the last highlight color on the dress on the front of the figure. So once again, I'm looking for what can be seen from basically that direction. So that's going to be a little bit of the edge of that collar. Just the top of that left shoulder. Not too far down. Cuff of that sleeve, just a little bit. on the left arm. Now going down to the dress in the front, most of that back there is not going to be visible, but this little bit here is going to catch just a touch of that light. Same with this one, will catch a bit more. And then this right knee is going to catch quite a bit of that. There we go. It still looks black though. And then we're going to go back and do that on the top of the shoulder as well. If you look at it from this side, you can see that that part of the shoulder catches the light. Just a bit. Okay. That part of her shirt right there catches a little bit of the light. And that top part of the sleeve is the closest part of her clothing to the light source. Let's give that a nice highlight. And the light is going to catch the bottom of that cuff just a bit. So we'll give that a little bit of a highlight. Pretty happy with that. Now I can see a spot that I missed earlier with the black, so I'm going to fix that now. It's just on the side of that apron in there. Okay, so now what are the other features that we need to paint? So her clothing, her main part of her clothing is done. Her skin tone is done. Now we need to start hitting some of the smaller details. So I think the first one, we'll think about what's closest inside to her body and work our way out. That way we do things which are hard to reach first and then work our way out to easier things. So I think that apron that she's wearing, and it's got a little belt that goes around the back, that's the most difficult thing to reach. So we're going to do that first. So the question becomes, what color should that be? Now she's kind of a spooky being. So let's grab burgundy wine. Okay, get a dollop of whatever you're using for burgundy wine, like purple or whatever it is. Let's throw a little bit of stone gray into that to desaturate it. Okay, and it looks a bit like skin tone now. But let's also throw a bit of, yeah, you guessed it, phantom glow right into that mix and make it sort of a weird purpley looking color. And that's going to look quite distinct on the black, especially once I start highlighting it with a bit of red. So now we're going to paint her apron, not the band around her body, but from her bag, but just the apron. It's going to be painted that color. This is her evil apron of doom. Her creepy necro apron. So you're asking, why did I throw that weird blue-green color in there? And the answer is just because it's the same color I used to highlight the black. And it's just going to tie those two surfaces together a little bit. And the apron should look distinct, but I don't want it to be like a glaring, crazy-looking thing sticking out from the rest of her clothing. I want it to be visible and a distinct surface, but I don't want it to dominate over the cool black dress that we did. And now I'm going to go in the back and paint the belt of the apron all the way around to the back. Okay, and I think we'll paint her shoes this color. Why? Because it's on the palette. We need to paint her shoes some color. And for the same reason, I don't want her feet to stick out like a sore thumb. I want them to be painted. Something that ties in with the rest of the figure. A little bit different from the area surrounding it, but I don't want it to become like a strange, highly visible, dominant part of the finished paint job. Just want it to be done, but not running the show. Okay, so now I'm going to add a little bit more stone gray. I think I'm going to add just a touch of that pink flesh tone we were using earlier. Yeah, that's what I want. I just want to basically lighten the color we were just using a little bit. And we'll use that to put some highlights on the apron. So I'm looking at like the top part of her chest right there gets a little bit of the highlight of this. On the flat part that faces the light. Same with this piece of the apron. There's like a flat triangle there that faces upwards. That can get this highlight. On the lower part of the belt, just below there, there's a little fold of the cloth there and a little bit of it there. Okay. And then on the side of it, just a little bit around the edge, tops of those little ripply bits. And then this big pouch right in the middle, you just kind of dab some color on the raised parts of that to make them better defined. And we're going to come back in a minute and we're going to separate out all those surfaces with some dark lining. Okay, so there's her apron is now painted. I missed the edge of that, so I'm going to touch that up. Just missed a little bit of the edge. I need to actually go and do this on the back as well, the back of the belt. Right in there, that little edge, that apron belt. There we go. A little bit of a highlight on the heels where they're worn. Flat parts of the soles of her shoes where they're worn. I have a feeling that this lady spends most of her money on strange herbs and spells and things, and not as much on her wardrobe. So her shoes are going to look a little bit worn. That's my plan now. Okay. Shoes visible. Clothing visible. All that stuff's done. And we need to go one level lighter on some of these highlights. So I'm going to grab some more flesh tone. Dump that in there, lighten it quite a bit. And I'm going to use this as a little bit of an edge highlight on the apron where like the edge of that might be a little bit sort of worn. Slightly lighter color. It's going to catch the light a little bit. Same thing on the other side, but only on the most raised part. And then the edge right below her neckline. There we go. Just to define the shape a little bit better. And the same thing on this lower part, but a little line there, particularly on that little corner. And then this pouch, it's got some sort of raised linear shapes. Those are going to get a little bit extra of this color to sort of pick them out a little bit. There. Creepy looking necro herbalist. Now we're into the difficult questions. What color should her bag be? I'm thinking sort of a stone gray color, but I did originally have it planned in. I was going to paint it this tan shadow color. So let's give that a try. The tan skin shadow from Reaper. It's just like a desaturated brown color. I'll throw some of that on the palette here. And we'll paint her satchel bag this color. So that's the strap that goes over her shoulder. There's a strap around this container that's going to be this color. Not the whole container, just the strap. The part of the belt that goes around to the back. And then do this whole bag this color. Probably do a second coat on this. But I think this like evil herb gathering bag she's got, it may not be like in the greatest quality or greatest condition. It might like the cloth might get eroded and worn through by the presence of evil within it, you know? It might leak evil. So it doesn't have to be perfect. You can decide for yourself whether it's leather or it's cloth. If it was cloth, now it's a good time to add some texture to it. How would we do that? Well, let's do that. Let's add some cloth texture to that bag. I'm going to take that tan shadow color, and let's add a little bit of black to it. Just a little bit. That's probably too much. Okay, there we go. We got a dark grayish version of that tan. And now what I'm going to do, this is going to be the shadows of the lines in the cloth. Okay, so I just draw some vertical lines on the cloth, working my way down the bag. They don't have to be super precise, but the more precise you can make them, the more this is going to look like a cloth texture. And just go from the top straight down. It doesn't have to be perfectly evenly spaced. A little bit evenly spaced helps. Just draw those lines down. Now, as you come around to the back and out of the light side of the figure, okay, in the shadows, textures are less visible. So once you're on the shadow side, just paint the whole strap and the whole bit of cloth this darker color. Okay, and onto the bottom. So there's just a hint of lines, but on the back of the bag, they're not really visible. Okay, you can do a little bit of that in there as well. A bit up there. And now we need to do some lines horizontally. So we want them to be parallel to the hem of the bag, or the mouth of the bag. So run them along, all the way along, around to the back, where they'll disappear into the shadow. Just a few like that. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be perfectly spaced. Okay, but you want to have the texture go right from that shadow on this side around to the shadow and disappear into the shadow on the other side. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to grab that same tan color right there, and we're going to grab a bit of, let's use the flesh tone. Let's throw a bit of that coppery flesh tone into that mix, and maybe just a little bit of the bone. Okay, just a little bit. We're just lightening that color up. So this is going to be the highlight of those individual threads where the light catches them. And the light doesn't catch them in the shadows, it catches them out in the open. So anywhere that you put a shadow, like a line, put this little thin line of this color in front of it, closer to the light side of the figure. And that's going to start to look like larger threads that are casting a shadow. Again, they don't have to be perfectly lined up, but the closer they are to the light lines being in front of the dark lines, the more that they're going to look like a raised sort of 3D texture on the surface. And that's sort of what we're aiming for. And as you get around to the back of the bag, do them faintly and then stop. You don't want them to go all the way back into the shadow because these things are not visible in the shadow. And then we go back, and with this lighter color, run it along the lip of the bag. And then all those lines you made horizontally, put this color on the top side of all of those lines. Much easier to do with a very sharp brush. You don't have to have the best brush, you just need a light touch to make this work. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to suggest the idea that there's a little bit of a texture there. And if you want to be fancy, you can put a few dots where those lines overlap each other, suggesting a little bit of a weave effect. Okay. There we go. So now we've got that sort of cloth-like texture going on that bag. Just faintly there. And that's good enough for what we're doing. I'm going to do that lighter color that we made. I'm going to do a little bit of that on the strap, just on the edge. You can do the cloth texture on the strap if you want. I'm not going to. I am going to just give it a quick highlight of that color. So now what we need is our leather case here. Needs some color. And I think that is the thing she prizes most. So we're going to color that. We're going to start with deep red on that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of this midnight blue, just a darker color, and I'm going to sort of desaturate that red-violet color, or deep red. And then I'm going to paint the case this deep red color. And this is going to need, I think, 2 coats. Why did I do that bit of blue in there first? Because most of our color scheme here is quite desaturated, meaning the colors are not pure, right? They're kind of faded, they're muted. And I don't want something on her that's going to just stand out like a sore thumb until I paint that herb, which are going to give that herb a creepy green glow. So I want this to be sort of an interesting color, but dull. So I dulled it by putting some, basically I put a gray into that color to dull it down. And it is going to require 2 coats to get a good coverage of this color, for sure. Now, we're almost done painting the main part of this figure. So now you want to slow down just a little bit and be a bit careful. Make sure we don't make any big messes. We're getting close to the end of the main painting bit. I'm going to do a second coat of that color. Now, I still need to give that a little bit of highlighting, but I don't want to make the color, like I don't want to just use straight deep red to do that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab, again, a bit of that skin tone, maybe grab a little bit of that bone. It doesn't really matter what you use. Essentially, we're just dulling this color down, but making it lighter. So we're still desaturating it, but we're making it lighter. Saturation just refers to how dense the pigment is on the surface of the Mini. So if anything you mix with the paint that reduces the density of the pigment desaturates it. So on this red box, the light is coming this way. There's my little mark to show the light direction. So I'm going to pull some highlights sort of halfway towards the shadow from that direction up towards the light. I'm going to do that right down the side of this box. And I'm not doing it beautifully. I'm just kind of wiggling the brush back and forth. Maybe it's like little scratches, I don't know. But it just enough to make the surface a bit lighter. There we go. So now we've got the box, we've got the strap, we've got all those things painted. We don't have all the plants painted, and we don't have the evil porcupine, whatever, hedgehog / seeds, whatever those are going to be down there painted yet. But we will get there. Okay. Now, this creepy thing in her hand. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by so the idea here is we want to create a bit of a saturated color with a light center to it to give the illusion that it's a light source, that it's glowing. So how do we do that? We need to add the glow color to the area around the object. So in that case, we could mix the glow color into, let's say for example, the glow is on her hand. We can mix the glow color into the skin tone and highlight again with those two colors combined close to the object. That'll give a hint of the color spreading out around the object. We want to make sure that the center of the object is the lightest thing on the figure. Okay, which means it should be the only thing on the figure which is really a pure white color. So I'm going to grab our solid white here, and I'm going to paint the center of this little herb. So it's got like these lines in the center of the leaves. I'm going to paint those pure white in the center. Now, why did I do that first? I did that first because whatever goes on top of this white now, this white is going to lighten it and show through. Okay, it's going to lighten it and show through. And that's the first step in creating the illusion of a light source. Do that front and back of the herb. Okay, so there's our little bright white thing. Now, what color is my light actually going to be? I think in this case, my light is going to be Dungeon Slime color. Why? Because I like Dungeon Slime. So there's some Dungeon Slime green. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint a halo of Dungeon green or Dungeon Slime green around that white. Now, if this goes over top of the white, it's okay because the white is going to lighten it anyway. So I want to be careful not to get this on the fingers. I'm just going to paint this green around those white lines I painted on the herb a moment ago. And do that on both sides of the herby thing. Okay, and you can see that the center of that, the light color shows through. Like the white shows through that. Now, what color is the plant actually going to be? I think it's going to be this cold green, this jade green. Why the jade green? Well, the Dungeon Slime is an interesting color. I can never tell whether it's warm or cold. The jade green is definitely cold. And what I want that to do is the white in the center to stand out from it. So I'm now going to mix. No, I'm not going to mix. I'm just going to use the jade green. You can use any green you want. Just want a darker green than the one you've been painting with. And I'm going to paint the outside of the herb around the Dungeon Slime this darker color. So it's going to look like a white leaf with a light colored center to it. Now that on its own is not enough to make this start looking like it's an illuminated, glowing, sort of herby thing. That's not enough on its own. So now the next step is to look at all of our various things surrounding it and decide, do we want to add the dungeon slime color into that to make it look like it's glowing a little bit. So for example, on the back of her hand here, okay, her hand, we use this mixture of burgundy wine and bone to make the flesh tone. Excuse me. Thank you. So I'm going to mix some burgundy wine and some bone again. But this time, I'm going to let the green into it as well. I'm going to put some of the dungeon slime into that skin tone. There we go. So that skin tone is about the same value, so it's about as bright, or as light I should say, as the skin tone that we highlighted earlier. So now, by painting this over that skin tone that was earlier painted the same value, but a different color, it's just going to slightly tint that skin tone towards our glow color. Just a little bit. Do that on the top of the fingers up here. But I'm only going to do that in areas where the glow from that little herb could logically hit the skin. So I'm not going to do it all the way down her sleeve. I'm not going to do it like all over her face. I'm just going to do a little bit on their hand closest to the herb to give that little bit of a sense of light coming out from the herb. Now, what a lot of people will tend to do when they're doing a little bit of a glow effect is they'll have the glow extend way too far away from the object. I used to do that too, and make the color way too intense. Okay.
She does look like Wednesday. I love it, man.
Good. All right, there she is. I need a quick sip of water.
Good idea. Thank you.
And now let's just double check. And I know some people were in the chat room, but I don't think anybody's typed anything. No, nobody's in the chat room anymore. Okay. We have 2 chat rooms on the go that I got to keep track of, so sometimes it can be a bit much. Now, we could put a little bit on the sleeve of our dress. And if we wanted to do that, what we'd do, I think the lime green is not going to affect the black quite the same way as it will the skin tone. So I would put a little bit of the jade green, okay, in with a little bit of the black. So you're creating like a very, very slightly lighter black color that's tinted green. And the only place that'll really be visible is on the inside of her sleeve in the shadow. Okay, on the inside of her sleeve in the shadow. Remember we said she was in moonlight? So the only place that that might be at all visible is going to be inside of her sleeve. And if you're really, really fussy about it, you could maybe put a little bit on her hair, but I'm not keen on that idea. Because that light is not strong. It's a glowing leaf, not like the soul of a major demon or something like that. So now we've got our color generally laid in. We've got the values slightly adjusted to show the increase in light. And then what we're going to do now, I could put a little bit there, but I'm not gonna. No, don't do too much. So now I'm going to grab my white again, and I'm going to repaint the center of that leaf with the white again. Why am I doing that? Because I want to make sure it stays the lightest thing on the figure. So I'm going to repaint that light zone several times. Okay, and that's going to make sure that it is the lightest, brightest object on here. There we go. Okay, and now you're probably wondering, what is he going to do now? Well, I'm going to grab my slime green color again. I'm going to thin it down a fair bit. I might actually add a bit of flow improver in there. And I'm going to paint over those white lines I just painted, and a bit of the jade green, all of that, so that the boundary between those colors gets blurred. And that gives a bit of that illusion of it glowing by having those boundaries between the lightest and that green color, the lightest area in that green color, not be super clear. It looks a bit hazy. And that's going to give us that little bit more of an illusion of a glow. Okay. Now I'm going to do something more difficult. You don't have to do this if you don't feel like it. But I'm going to make a mix of jade green and slime green. Okay, so half and half of each. And I'm going to paint that in the zone between the green slime and the jade green on the outer part of the herb. And that's to show, well, again, it's to blur the lines between those colors. Okay. Do the same thing on the other side. Okay, so it's looking pretty bright. There's my focal point right out there. Looking pretty bright. Looks very green. And it looks very different from her. She does not look green. She looks pale, pale, pale. So there's a big contrast between this little glowing herb and her. And that's what I was hoping for. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take that same jade green. I'm going to paint the leaves of the plants in her bag with that jade green. Why am I doing that? It's because I want this to tie in to the green, which is in the light in her hand. Okay, so I want it, by painting this green, this is going to stand out more as green. But I don't want this to be as bright green as the thing in her hand. So what I'm going to do is I'm giving this a base coat of this nice jade green color. But remember I said that she's not the nicest person and she's gathering awful stuff. We're going to darken these leaves right back down again with some little tricks. And we're going to make them look rotted and gross and horrible. Okay, so that the hint of that green color is there, but it's not in charge of the show. It's not in charge of what's happening on the mini. It's just augmenting the overall look of that glow that I want from the herb. So it's like she's been looking at all these evil corrupt plants that she's going to use to murder people, or to prepare people to be turned into zombies, or who knows whatever evil she's up to. And maybe she's just found some sort of a magical, powerful, good-aligned type herb, and right now it's changing her alignment against her will. Who knows? Stuff like that happens in D&D games all the time. And I think those berries in her bag are going to be poisonous berries. So let's paint those deep red. Give them some more red. Poisonous red berries. Poisonous is a very technical term that means sort of poisonous. Your mother doesn't want you to eat them, but you won't die if you do. Poisonous. Did I make that up? Possibly. Have I made a lot of stuff like that up over the years as a dungeon master playing D&D? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Can't make up weird stuff on the spot. You're going to have a hard time being a DM. Because your players will definitely make up weird stuff on the spot. And then you'll be in trouble. We just realized that looks kind of Christmassy in there. Don't worry, we're going to fix that. Now, just need to give that a second to dry. I said I wanted those to look bright red. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab pink. I'm going to grab some, what is this, Runic Glow. This is magenta. Throw a little bit of that on the palette. I'm only getting a little bit because the nozzle's blocked. I'm going to use that bright pink color. And I'm going to paint that on the tops of each of those little red berries, facing towards the light. I'm going to paint them pink. You can paint them yellow if you want to. You can paint them orange. Doesn't matter. You just want some sort of lighter color that when you paint red over it is going to show through the red and make the red look lighter. And if you used orange, the red's going to look more orangey. If you use a pink, the red's going to start to look pink, and so on. What happens if you were to use, say, lime green? Well, then the red's going to start to look yellowy brown. So don't do that. Okay. And I think I want some more skin tone. Right, I'm going to put the skin tone in the pink and lighten the pink even further. So there's my pink. A little bit of skin tone. I'm going to put that on the top of those berries again too. Why am I so focused on the berries? They're going to be an interesting dash of color that will catch the eye. Bring the eye into the green. The green is associated with the glow. I don't know, it might end up being confusing, but it also might end up making the green look better. We will know eventually. So there's my bright berries in there. Wow, this color's really not helping me out any today. Let's see what we can do about that. Let's throw a white balance off for a moment. So just warning anybody who's color sensitive, I'm about to throw the color balance way off, but you'll be able to see the red then. Okay, there, that gives you a sense of the more accurate color of the berries in there. They're quite a bright red. Okay, bright pink, I should say. There's everything going back to desaturate. Let's fix the focus if we can. There we go, back in focus. All right, now I'm going to paint those berries red. You could paint them a different red. You could paint them a fire red. You could paint them fluorescent red. I don't care. I'm going to go back to my blood red that I was using, or deep red. I'm going to thin that down a little bit so that the colors I just painted will show through. And I'm going to put a coat of red back over them again. And there's my creepy looking red berries. Now I want to kill the green color. How do I kill the green color? So to kill the green color, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that jade green, put some of it down there. I'm going to mix some midnight blue with it, which will, as we've already learned, desaturate it. I'm going to thin it into a wash consistency. So this is a jade green, really desaturated. I used a darker color to do this. I didn't just use any color. I wanted to use a darker color to desaturate it. And now I'm just going to basically wash these berries and these, not the berries, the leaves with this green. And they're going to dull right down. Okay. And as it dries, they're going to just look darker and darker and darker and duller. There we go. And then, got about an hour left. Perfect. Okay, then the next thing I'm going to do, we just need to wait for that to dry for a minute, okay? So I think what I'll do while I'm waiting is I'm going to do the white again in my center of my glow effect. Remember I said I'm just going to keep doing that white again and again and again to make sure it stays the lightest thing on the figure. Okay, and you need to be fairly careful about this to keep it really, really tight. Really fine lines, just right in the center of where you want the glow to be. Okay? Now there's some other tricks you can do. One trick would be to switch from using a green to a yellow. Moth green is the classic Reaper example for that. And that bit of yellow in the center of this now will make that just really appear to be glowing. We could do that. But maybe I'll decide at the end whether I want to do that. But for now, what I want to do is, while this is drying, one of the next things I need to do on those plants is need to basically separate them into the separate leaf shapes, and then I'm going to model them and make them all diseased looking. So I'm going to go back to my blue liner now. My blue liner. You could do this with black. I'm going to mix the black into the blue liner, and it just gives me a very, very dark color that's already been thinned. I can put some flow improver in if I want to. And basically this color now, I can use it to put lines around things to darken them. And that's what I'm going to do now with my, basically everything on the figure while I'm waiting for these plants to dry. So like this leather box, anywhere that there's a line, like two surfaces meet, I'm going to put a line of this black paint. So this little belt around the little box, I'm going to put a black line around it with the blue liner and black mixture. I'm going to do that at the bottom of the box. And this is a really important skill to develop. It gives you brush control by practicing it. And the payoff will be doing things like the lines we were doing on the bag will become easier. Anytime you have to do details or you want things that are the same color to look separate from each other, you're going to be relying on this dark lining skill to make that happen. So it's a really important skill to develop early in your painting career. It makes a lot of other things easier later. And I know I've said that in these videos many times before, but it really works. There's a big payoff from taking the time to learn to do this. I'm going to do this under the edge of this little flap on her belt pouch, and that's going to instantly give it a little bit more of a definition and shadow. Inside this little shape here, around the outside of the little shape, under the pocket, under the little flap of the apron meets the little pouch. Basically everywhere that two shapes meet, it's going to do this little bit of a dark line, except around her face, because we already did this at the start when we put that very dark line around her face. Okay, I don't want to risk messing up her skin tone at this stage. If you have a better brush, this is the time to break it out. If you've got a brush with a very, very thin point, very sharp point, that's the ideal tool for this job. You want to break that out now. If you don't, well, it might be time to consider investing in one. Generally speaking, a slightly larger size brush, like a size 0, with a really good tip, a high quality brush, like a sable brush, something like that, is the best tool for this job. I know lots of painters that like to use very, very small synthetic brushes, and if that works for you, that's fine. Personally, I prefer to use something a little bit bigger, holds a little bit more paint, that just has a really sharp tip on it, and that is what I prefer to work with. Gives me good results and less frustration. There we go. Quite happy with that. Not so happy with that mess I just made. Oh, this is the way it goes sometimes. Okay, so that's looking okay. I'm pretty happy with that. And then I need to do the same thing for the leaves. I'm going to separate the leaves from each other the same way. So like there's right there's a line between two leaves. So I'm going to run this along that. There's another one right there. Separate those under there, and there, there, And around the outside of all these berries as well. That look quite dark. Do that line down the middle of the leaves if you want, don't have to. Okay, now there's our leaves pretty well defined, everything's pretty well defined. So now what I'm going to do is go a little bit crazy. I'm going to take that black paint, put a little bit more blue liner in it, get it flowing paint again, and I'm going to make like splotches on the leaves. So like just little connected circles. So dot, dot, dot together. Dot, 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 and then some dots across. Some dots in the middle. I want it to look kind of irregular and not very nice. Okay. Because these are our evil, not so nice herbs. If you were really keen, you could paint some skull shapes in them, make them look really, you know, downright nasty and evil. Whatever you like, okay? So I'm reducing the amount of green visible. And what that's going to do for me is I've got the hint of green in the leaves, but it's not running the show, okay? And when you come back to the OSL, the object source lighting effect, right, the green is there, but it's also there in the thing in her hand. And what that's going to do for us is it's going to bring out, your eye is going to catch the green more easily because of the green that's also in her bag. Now, the next thing I want to do is I'm going to grab some Phantom Glow. Yes, you guessed it, more Phantom Glow. And I'm going to put dots of Phantom Glow on top of the black dots. So they look like kind of plagued, awful little plants. The dots can be bigger, smaller, whatever you want to do. Just break up the green with a bit of a different color. Lots of people like to use colors like really opaque cold yellows for this kind of thing. That works really well. And I'm just trying to break up the perfection of those leaves. Add something a little bit more kind of diseased and unpleasant looking to it. If you wanted to, you could put red on the leaves as well, because the red over the green is going to turn sort of a brownish color, and that's not going to look very nice either. Just don't completely cover over the jade green or whatever you used for green, because you need a little hint of it there to help the OSL stand out a bit. That's kind of what I wanted. If I wanted to, I could do a brown wash over those leaves, something like that. But I don't think we really need to do that right now. Okay. We're going to take some Dungeon Slime and mix it with some more Jade Green, because mine's dried up here. A little bit of Dungeon Slime and Jade Green. Just a little bit. And we're just going to re-highlight some of the edges of those leaves where they're closest to the light. And I'm just going to pick out the edges of the leaves where they're green, not where they're like patchy. And that's to make the edges of the leaves more visible again. So the shapes are still clear that they're leaves. because we kind of lost that when we did that bit of making them look all mottled. And the model was to break up the strength of the green. This is to make sure that the outline of the shape of the plants still exists. We don't want to lose the shape of the plants completely. These are some pretty gross looking plants. That's what I wanted. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that. So there we've got Wednesday Addams, or whoever this girl is, with her creepy poisonous berries, her creepy poisonous plants, and she's now found, oh, a perfect, beautiful little leaf. Nice. The last thing I think I want to paint today is going to be her sickle. And I was originally planning to do the sickle as just paint it silver, do a true metallic thing, but we've got enough time. We've got the right paints already on the palette. I think we can do a little bit of a non-metallic metal approach on this. And that's, for something like this sickle, that is not going to be anything particularly complicated, okay? So the main colors we're going to use, we've got our very dark blue-black color. That's going to be the shadow on our metal. We've got some midnight blue, or whatever blue color you put on your palette. And that's going to help with this. So what I want to do, the first thing is we're going to put a highlight, a very small, very light highlight on this handle, which is like a rod shape. And the light is coming this way. And the light is going to catch the surface of that rod just a little bit down. So if the light's coming this way, the reflection will be actually just a little bit down from that. So I'm going to start by putting a very, very dark line on that handle, just around the spot where I want that highlight to be. So this is actually going to be just below where that highlight is going to be. So just a very dark line across. Okay, and then I want to be able to have a gleaming, shining curve on the outside of the blade there. So close to the handle, I'm going to paint this, the outside of the blade this color. And then up close to her, so my highlight's going to be around there, and above that, close to the end of her braid, I'm going to paint the rest of the back of that sickle this very dark color. Now the light's going to come across, it's going to catch the tip of the blade, and maybe catch the edge of this ring and back there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the inside of the sickle this black color as well. Really make it dark. And I'm going to do the same thing on the back. Inside of the curve. There we go. So I'm going to have a highlight there, a little bit there, along there, on the back of this curve, on the tip of this blade, and on the edge of the blade. And we're going to, just with a couple of quick, simple steps, we're going to make that look like shiny metal. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab some of my Dragon White, put a little bit of that Midnight Blue in it. This is like my intermediate color in my metal. Why do things look like they're shiny? They look shiny when you've got a very bright highlight next to a very dark shadow. So I know that I want my highlight to be there. So I'm going to start just above that, and I pull downwards, and I'm deliberately highlighting each shape separately because I've already got a lot of dark shadow there. So my highlight is going to run along there. So I start above that and pull my lines down. Key thing is that these are all going to line up, right? I could put some dots there to show how they line up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are all going to line up across this shape. Then the next one is going to be right about there, because that's the curve pointing back towards our light source. So as I've shown on these videos before, I'm going to start by doing an upwards brush stroke to create my highlight there, and then I'm going to come from above and pull down, And where they overlap, I get my lightest highlight right in there. Now, directly opposite that, there's my light direction, directly opposite that over here, the light's going to catch just on the inside of the blade a little bit. So we just put this same color a little bit on the inside of the blade, and the same thing down here, just a little bit. It doesn't need much. There we go. Now, you're like, but that's not shiny. I'm like, no, I know it's not shiny, but it will be in a minute. Just give me your faith for a moment. It's one of the things about non-metallic metal. It tends to look really bad before it looks any good. Now, the highlights on the back are not going to be as light, okay, because they're away from the light source. So we're going to do the same thing on the back, but we're not going to highlight these any lighter than this. This is as light as these are going to be. Whereas on the front, we're going to do this with a little bit of white as well, and they're going to be much shinier looking. Inside of the curve, there we go. And then the last step on this side, okay, is an edge highlight on the edge of that cutting surface and on the edge of the, where it's like an edge between the blade and the back. Give that like a line, an edge highlight line. And then the same thing on the inside of the cutting surface. And that's good enough for non-metallic metal sort of implied reflectiveness on this side. And we'll do that on the outside of the curve as well, like that. Good enough for the back of the figure. Okay. We do the same edge highlight on this side of the figure. So we do that line all the way around. Now, if you put a lot of water in your paint, this is not going to work. It needs to be smooth but not wet. If it's wet, it'll run everywhere, and it's really not going to work. There we go. And the back of that blade again. Okay, so that's where our highlights in white are going to go now. So I'm just, because this is what I'd like to call like speed non-metallic metal. It's not meant to be absolutely perfect. It's just meant to give a quick impression of shininess. So I'm going to jump right up to pure white now. And exactly what we just did before. I'm going to do these same highlights again, but much, much smaller. We've got our dark line right across along there. So I'm going to line up these dots on the outside of the curve right up against that dark shadow we painted earlier. And they've got to line up in a line going up the length of the handle. White dots like that. And they have to line up or it doesn't look shiny. Okay, that's starting to look shiny already. Now, on the blade, we've got the inside of this curve, which doesn't get quite as much of a highlight. It's going to be really small. And my brush strokes are pulling the white paint out towards the tip. Pull it out towards the tip, away from the light source. I'll do the same thing on the other tip of this sickle, going the other way. Just a little bit lightly going out towards the tip. Nice bright white dot on the tip of those points. Okay, starting to look shiny already. And then you get that effect that I'm having as well. I got that white tip on the brush. Clean that off. This is the only bit of this which is a little bit more challenging. And I'm going to take that white paint again. And the same highlight I did with the gray, I'm going to do with the white. And I want it to end up being right around there. That's the center of the highlight. So what I want to do is start just a little bit outside of the highlight, still on this gray surface. And I'm going to pull along the gray back towards that little highlight dot I just made. Like that. And then I'm going to turn it upside down and do the same thing, going exactly the opposite direction. And I don't want to go past the center of that highlight. I don't want to go back into the area that I already highlighted. And there we go. Sharp looking shiny sickle. Now we can go one step further. We're going to grab another load of white paint, and we can put a little dot of white right on the edge of the back of the blade. Same thing on that edge. Just a little bit of it. So we're highlighting the edge highlight, if you will. And that's going to help with the shininess. And a little bit of an edge highlight on the front part of the blade and on the back part of the blade. But we don't want to connect them up. We need that contrast. They need that separation of the surfaces. Okay? And then there's our non-metallic metal shiny sickle. As easy and as quick as that. What did I leave out? Oh, I didn't paint the bone things on her shoulders. Do we have time for that? Yeah, we got time for that. So just the few little details that still need to be done, but nothing too serious. I'm going to grab that bit of bone again. And I think I'm going to make that bone a little bit blue this time. A little bit blue. Now the bone is already painted black. I'm talking about this bone scrunchy thing on her hair. So I'm not going to cover it. I'm just going to base coat it. I'm just going to paint little bluish bone highlights on those shapes to bring them out. It's got sort of like little ring shapes to it. Okay, and I do the same thing on the one right up by the back of her hair. On the back of her head, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Right in there, there's one. It's like either a scrunchie or a little piece of string, or it's a barrette, or who knows what I don't know what the things are called. It's a hair holdy thingerer. A hair holdy thingerer, that's my description. Okay. And then we're going to grab straight bone color and just put another little bit of highlight on that. And they'll be done. So right like that. Just focusing on towards the light direction. So each of those little shapes gets a little bit of a highlight, nothing too serious. If you want to make it look more bone-like, you could give it a little bit of a yellow, like an off-yellow glaze or something. You could look a bit more, I don't know, yellow to bone. And then we're pretty much good on that. So there we go. There's our Wednesday Addams style village necromancer out grabbing evil herbs. Out in the forest doing her thing. As always, paint the base of your rim black. Do some details on the base, like put some little plants, put some little stones. You don't want to put bright green grass and glowing yellow flowers on this base. Remember we said she's out in the moonlight. But if you have some dark colored tufts of grass, some dark colored plants, things like that, you could put those on there. Don't, paint the base bright color. Like, actually, it's pretty much a good color right now to suggest that she's outside at night. Okay? And, I think that's, maybe a good spot to stop. Now, I did say I would show you what it would look like if we were to use Reaper's famous moth green on there. So there's the moth green. There's a big difference between moth green and dungeon slime. It's very hard to see in that camera shot, just because the camera loses its brain. One is much greener than the other. One has a lot more white. The Dungeon Slime has a lot more white filler, and it's a higher value, so it's a lighter paint. But the Dungeon Slime, not the Dungeon Slime, the Moth Green is really a lime green. It's a very light lime green, and when you thin it and glaze it onto a figure, it looks very yellow. And because of that yellow, your brain always perceives yellows as being warmer and closer. And you put that in the center of a light source, your brain begins to believe that it's glowing. And this is a way that if your OSL with green and yellow is not really working as well as you hoped, you can take a color like this, thin it down to a glaze consistency, and then just a tiny little bit at a time, just a little bit at a time, add it into the mix. So I'm going to glaze this over the existing colors that I have on there. And I don't know if you can see that, but right off the bat, that looks much brighter. It really lightens it up. I'll do that on the back. So there's what it looks like right now. And there's Moth Green. So Moth Green is a really good color, particularly for green OSL. Okay. If I take the Moth Green now and put it on the back of her finger, that's going to make her thumb look green, which is kind of a good joke. Back of her finger, a little bit on the palm of her hand. Okay, that's really making the glow sort of extend its reach out onto the figure. Don't overdo it. We don't want to overdo it. We just want a little bit. Now, the question becomes, is that high enough value? Is it light enough? Okay, I've dulled that down. I've darkened it with the Moth Green, right? So what I can do, grab some white, mix that in with the Moth Green. Repaint that over the center of our glowing object. So bringing the color saturation, it reduces the saturation of the Moth Green, but it brings the value of the center of the light source back up again, closer to white. And as I've said about 9 times, the center of a light source has to be the lightest thing on the figure. And then I'll just go back to my white again. And you're saying, but Geoff, you put pure white in the center of your non-metallic metal. I did. But I also painted that white over blue-gray. And that white over blue-gray is lower value. It's darker than white painted over bright Moth Green. So between those two, if we were to take a grayscale photo, this is going to look lighter than that. You're not happy with it, you think it's that they're competing with each other too much, then we just go back to our blue. This would be our midnight blue. Okay, we make a glazed consistency out of that, so we thin it with quite a bit of water. Not much on the brush, really not much at all. And like, not going to do much, see? And you could go over the whole NMM with just a touch of that blue. And just dull it down just the slightest touch. You're still going to have pretty good contrast. It's not going to be as good as it was before you glazed. Okay, but you're still going to have that non-metallic metal look to it. But it won't be as light as your glowing green herb. Okay? I think we could probably call her done at that stage. So from this point on, like normally if I'm painting my own figures, I'm just going to keep refining it, but you know, I think this is as good a place as any to call it. Just a few little dots on the edge of that little container. Make the edge of it a little bit more visible. There. All right. Thank you very much, Goth Lady, Goth Herbalist. We appreciate your visit to our studio. Please don't send any curses our way. Okay, done. 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 There she is, done. All right, thanks for joining us today. That is the Herbalist from Juliana from Reaper Miniatures. And next week is the second last one of our series. It's going to be the Greek Wizard. And then the final one, Born Ironbrow, will be the following Friday. Okay, just a quick follow-on. The final result of our painting of the Herbalist. This is our Goth Herbalist / Necromancer. And so the final details have been added in. They're very, very dark, and that's on purpose. I've given her some very dark tufts of grass around the bottom. And then I've applied some very dark ink. This would be Payne's Gray ink, to darken down the base, to darken down those plants. And overall, she has quite a gloomy, dark, dismal look, with the sole exception of that bright green flower or glowing lucky leaf in her hand, ready to be used in some magic spell, or maybe her mood will change now that she's got this interesting plant to attract her attention. So there she is. That's our finished Goth Herbalist. Okay, that's it. We'll see you the next time.